The Arthurian legend commences with the appearance of a magician, his face marred by burned scars, as he extracts a beetle from his mystical box. Placing the beetle on a bouquet of white lilies, he dispatches it to Princess Morgan's chamber within the royal palace. Oblivious to the sender's identity, she places it beside her bed. That night, as she sleeps, the beetle crawls onto her bed and through her ear infiltrates her mind. The following morning, news spreads that Princess Morgan has fainted and remains unresponsive. The palace physician, Gaius, administers various treatments, but to no success. Merlin contemplates employing his abilities, yet Gaius dissuades him, citing dire consequences from a previous encounter with Guinevere's father. In another scene, Prince Arthur converses with the scared magician, revealing knowledge of his true name, Edwin, and his ability in curing all maladies, including Princess Morgan's coma. Arthur vouches for the kingdom's esteemed physician, Gaius, but Edwin assures him of his availability should they require his services, directing them to his dwelling. As Princess Morgan's condition deteriorates, they eventually turn to Edwin. The king summons him to the palace, where Gaius recognizes him as the one who had previously treated his facial burns. Edwin denies this claim and requests to assess the princess's condition to determine the appropriate treatment. The king grants his request and designates Merlin as his assistant, facilitating the transfer of Edwin's equipment from the inn to the palace. Edwin emphasizes the need for confidentiality in his work. He initiates the treatment by retrieving the enchanted box of beetles, guiding one to exit through the princess's ear. Subsequently, Edwin informs the king that the princess had suffered a brain hemorrhage exacerbated by Gaius's medications. As he prepares to depart, the king insists that Edwin assume the role of the palace physician. Edwin tactfully declines, citing his reluctance to cause embarrassment to Gaius. On another front, Gaius harbors suspicions regarding Edwin. To investigate, he ventures to the library and implores the librarian to provide him with chronicles from the time of witch purges 2 decades ago. However, the librarian refuses, asserting that the king has prohibited access to these old records. Meanwhile, Merlin, noticing Edwin's absence from his room, ventures in to inspect his equipment. There, he encounters the box with enigmatic symbols. Driven by curiosity, he examines the symbols, and to his amazement, the box magically opens. Inside, previously inert beetles spring to life, brought to motion by Merlin's inadvertent activation. Edwin enters the scene, realizing Merlin possesses magical power. He extends an offer to teach Merlin magic, but Merlin declines. Instead, Edwin asks Merlin to keep his secret, swearing not to disclose Merlin's magical abilities. Both agree to keep each other's secrets. As night falls, the librarian delivers the record to Gaius, unveiling Edwin's hidden history. Meanwhile, Edwin dines with the king, subtly undermining Gaius's credibility. In light of this revelation, the king appoints Edwin as the palace physician. Gaius confronts Edwin, disclosing that he has uncovered his past, and revealing his intent to exact revenge on the king for burning his witch parents 2 decades earlier. Edwin counters by threatening to expose Merlin's secrets as well. Faced with a difficult choice, Gaius remains silent, unable to jeopardize Merlin's safety. Seeking counsel, Gaius visits the lair of the dragon, Kilkera. Gaius confides in the dragon, torn between loyalty to the king and safeguarding Merlin. Kilkera advises him to accept reality and maintain silence. After deep reflection, Gaius makes the decision to depart the king's palace. Edwin arrives at the palace bearing medicine for the king's persistent shoulder pain. Upon consumption, the king becomes paralyzed, defenseless as Edwin reveals his true identity and vicious intent. The paralyzed king is unable to react as Edwin retrieves beetle from his mystical box, positioning it on the king's face. The beetle inches its way toward the king's ear, poised to deliver a fatal blow. Retreating to his quarters, Edwin encounters Gaius, who challenges him, determined to prevent harm to the king. Edwin questions Gaius's change of heart, alluding to a time when Gaius was complicit in similar actions. Edwin surrounds Gaius in a ring of fire until Merlin intervenes. With magic, Edwin moves an axe from the wall toward Merlin, who, using his magical abilities, returns the axe, striking down Edwin. Both rush to King Uther's chamber, where Merlin removes the magical beetle from the king's head, saving his life and Gaius's. The king recovers, reinstates Gaius as the palace physician, and grants him his freedom. Merlin's adventures persist. Princess Morgan is haunted by a nightmare in which a beautiful girl drowns Arthur in a lake. Though deeply disturbed, she keeps the dream to herself. In the forest, during a hunting excursion with Arthur and Merlin, they hear a woman scream. They discover a girl with her father, besieged by bandits. Arthur dispatches 2 of the attackers, while the 3rd escapes. Then he invites them to the palace. In the palace, Morgan recognizes the girl named Sophia. She's the same one she saw in the dream. Morgan confides in Gaius about her dream and the girl. Gaius reassures her that they are merely dreams, advising her to keep them to herself and not share them with others. In the forest, Sophia's father, Ulfric, wields a magical wand, his eyes bearing an eerie crimson hue. The pair planned everything and used Arthur for their way to the palace. The bandit who escaped the previous day now demands more money than initially agreed upon, and in response, Ulfric murders the man. The following day, Arthur asks Merlin to cover for him as he plans to steal away with Sophia into the forest for some private time. In the woods, Sophia attempts to draw close to Arthur, with sinister intentions of seduction and harm. As she tries to bewitch him, a bandit unexpectedly appears, thwarting her spell. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Merlin confides in Gaius about Arthur and Sophia, raising suspicion. Gaius investigates, finding Ulfric's magic wand in their room, reinforcing his belief that their intentions are not good. Morgan encounters Sophia and vows revenge if anything bad happens to Arthur. Sophia returns to her room, where her father awaits. She informs him of her failed mission, revealing that Arthur had protected her from the bandits, sparking a sense of vulnerability. Ulfric urges his daughter to do whatever it takes to make Arthur fall in love with her, with the ultimate goal of returning to their original form and escaping the confines of their short-lived human existence. The following day, Sophia accompanies Arthur into the forest, where she casts a powerful magical spell on him. Her eyes turn a terrifying shade of red. Arthur's eyes become red too, indicating his loss of power and free will. Meanwhile, Merlin and Gaius discuss Morgan's abilities, with Merlin concerned about the potential consequences if the king were to learn of her powers. Elsewhere, Ulfric goes to a lake and conjures a spell, summoning the fairies. He implores their leader, a demon, for permission to cross into the city of Avalon, but the demon denies his request, revealing it to be a punishment to remain in human form. Ulfric offers Sophia's passage in exchange for Arthur's soul. Hidden nearby, Merlin overhears this and rushes to Gaius, urging them to act swiftly to save Arthur. The next morning, Arthur, under Sophia's spell, stands before King Uther and asks to marry her. The king refuses and threatens harm to Sophia and her father if Arthur disrespects him. Arthur prepares to leave the palace. When Merlin intervenes, Ulfric uses his magic wand to throw him against a wall. At the lake, Arthur remains as unresponsive as a statue, while Ulfric begins the dark ritual. Meanwhile, Gaius discovers the unconscious Merlin in his room and rushes to wake him, instructing him to find Arthur. He arrives just in time to see Sophia leading Arthur to the lake. Merlin locates Ulfric's magic wand on the lake's side. He directs it towards Sophia and Ulfric, causing their death. Afterward, Merlin retrieves Arthur from the lake and returns him to the palace. When Arthur regains consciousness the next day, he is unaware of what happened to him during the recent events. Several days later, a man and a child are walking through the market when they find themselves pursued by the guards. The man manages to reach the palace, using his magical powers to lock the gates behind him to ensure that the child is left outside for safety. The guards capture the man within the palace and place him in the jail. Through his telepathic abilities, the child reaches out to Merlin for help. Merlin hears the child's voice in his mind and locates him, hiding the child in Morgan's room. Merlin visits the child and finds him running a fever. He administers medicine, and during this process, he hears the child addressing him as Embrace. Merlin inquires about this name, and the child reveals that it's how he is known among the druids, sparking Merlin's concern about a hidden secret. He confides in Kilhera, who warns him that the child poses a future threat to Arthur and advises that the child should be eliminated. The king orders the execution of the child's father due to his status as a magician, sentencing him to be burned at the stake. Merlin decides to confide in Gaius about the situation, and they plan to smuggle the child out of the palace. However, they are apprehended by Arthur, who remains unaware why the child is with Morgan. The king reprimands Morgan, who defends herself by claiming concern for the innocent child. She pleads with Arthur to spare him from execution. Merlin once again consults with Kilgera, who repeats his warning about the child's future threat to Arthur. Meanwhile, Arthur drugs the guards, liberates the child from his cell, and escorts him through the underground passages leading to a secret exit, where they had planned to meet Merlin. In his room, Merlin contemplates Kilgera's advice, initially hesitant to save the child. However, when the child reaches out to him telepathically, begging for help, Merlin rushes to the secret exit. As they part ways, the child looks back, expressing his gratitude and mentioning a future meeting. Upon learning of the child's escape, the king warns Morgan that if her involvement in smuggling him is discovered, he will kill her. Arthur takes the boy to his clan and inquires about his name, to which the child responds, Mordred. During this period, Ninnu, the witch, plans to exact revenge on King Uther. At the knight's cemetery where those who perished 20 years ago, she casts a dark spell upon one of the graves. The grave splits open, and a knight emerges from it. Meanwhile, King Uther is in the midst of installing Arthur as the crown prince when a black knight on horseback dramatically enters the great hall. He creates a heavy silence, throwing his gauntlet on the ground and challenging anyone to pick it up. And one of the knights named Owen takes up the challenge, setting the time for their duel the following day at noon. The fight will continue until one of them falls. The Black Knight departs without revealing his identity, and since Owen accepted the challenge, no one can replace him. Merlin discusses the knight's identity with Gaius, who is deeply concerned about the matter. In the library, Gaius delves into the chronicles to find information about the knight, discovering that he is Sir Tristan de Bois, Arthur's maternal uncle, who had died 20 years ago. He informs the king about his findings, but the king dismisses it, asserting that the dead do not return to life, and that he himself had killed Tristan 2 decades ago. The next day, the fight begins, and the Black Knight is waiting in the field. Initially, Owen does not know how to overcome him, but he wrests the opportunity and stabs the Black Knight in the chest. Strangely, he is not affected by this stab. He continues his fight until he kills Owen. And once again, the knight throws the gauntlet on the ground for his next opponent. Arthur intends to pick it up, but King Uther holds him back, so another knight picks it up. Merlin notices that nothing wounds the knight. Gaius says that if he died 20 years ago, then of course he won't feel anything. To confirm this, they go to the cemetery of the knights, and indeed, they find that Tristan de Bois' grave is open, which means that he's the Black Knight. But what is the story of the Black Knight? 20 years ago, when Arthur's mother, Igraine, died during childbirth, Tristan de Bois accused Uther of being the reason for his sister's death. A quarrel broke out between them, and Uther was able to kill Tristan. When he was taking his last breath, he promised Uther that he would return to life and kill him. The following day, the Black Knight emerges victorious in his duel, defeating the challenger. When the Black Knight once again extends a challenge, Arthur steps forward to face him. This decision infuriates the king, who chastises his son for hastening to accept the challenge. Gaius suggests to the king that he persuade Arthur to withdraw, but King Uther insists that it's too late to do anything. Meanwhile, Merlin tries to use his magic to defeat the Black Knight, surrounding the knight with fire while he stands in the darkness. However, the magic fails, and the fire is extinguished. In the library, Merlin consults the Book of Legends in search of a solution to vanquish the knight. The librarian informs him that the only way to kill the knight is with a sword instilled with the breath of a dragon, capable of nullifying any magic or demonic spells. Merlin requests the finest sword from Guinevere and then proceeds to the dragon's lair. He tells Kilgera his story, and the dragon agrees on the condition that only Arthur can wield the sword. Merlin prepares the sword and shield for Arthur, unaware that Gaius has conspired with King Uther on an alternative plan. Gaius administers a drug to Arthur that induces a prolonged sleep, causing him to miss the upcoming battle. In Arthur's place, King Uther intends to confront the Black Knight. The duel unfolds between the Black Knight and King Uther. During the fight, the king manages to remove the knight's helmet, revealing an ugly visage beneath. The Black Knight gains the upper hand, pinning the king to the ground. In a critical moment, King Uther thrusts his sword into the knight's chest, using its power to nullify the magic and disintegrate the Black Knight into fragments that vanish into thin air. Among the crowd is the witch Nimue, seemingly vexed that her plot to eliminate King Uther has failed. Meanwhile, Arthur awakens and, upon learning what happened, confronts his father in anger, questioning why he executed this plan. King Uther responds that he would never sacrifice his own flesh and blood for any cause, leaving Arthur surprised as he had believed his father didn't trust in him or his abilities. Merlin hears Kilgera's voice inside his head calling him. Once at its lair, it speaks angrily that it was confident the one person who must use the sword is Arthur, but King Uther used it. Kilgera wants Merlin to throw the sword into the magic lake where it should be. No one should take the sword, otherwise, great damage will occur. Indeed, Merlin throws the sword into the bottom of the lake. In Merlin's village, the residents are facing attacks from bandits who steal their weapons and crops. Merlin's mother, in an attempt to secure some crops for the sake of their children, is slapped and thrown to the ground by a man named Camelot. She decides to seek help from the king, urging Merlin to accompany her. At the palace, she implores King Uther to assist in dealing with these bandits. However, the king explains that the village is not part of his kingdom's territory, and crossing into it could provoke their king, potentially leading to war and unwanted consequences. Merlin takes it upon himself to help his village and rides back home, accompanied by Morgan and Guinevere. As they rest in the forest, they are joined by Arthur, who has followed them, and is determined to lend a hand. Upon reaching the village the following morning, they discover that Camelot and his men have once again attacked the village to seize the crops. In response, Arthur and his men engage the thieves in combat, with Merlin using his magic to deter one of the attackers by setting his back on fire. The thieves retreat, vowing to return for another confrontation. Arthur addresses the villagers, motivating them to stand up for their village, children, and women, urging them not to let the enemy seize their property. He promises to train the men to defend their home. The following day, the discovery of a villager's death with an arrow in his back leaves the villagers even more apprehensive. Accustomed to submission and feeling weak, they remain hesitant to confront the bandits. Arthur, however, remains determined that they should not invite oppression and should instead fight for their rights. Arthur and his men formulate a plan. When Camelot and his bandits are engaged in battle, they will surround them with fire. Guinevere is designated to ignite the flames, but when she proves unable to do so, Merlin steps in and uses his magic. The battle commences, but it becomes apparent that the bandits outnumber the villagers. Merlin's magic tilts the balance in their favor, securing victory for their side. Camelot fights for his last hope, throws his spear at Arthur, however. Will takes it in Arthur's place. Arthur wonders who used his magical powers to defeat the bandits. Was it Merlin or Will? Will, in his last breaths, reveals that it was he who used his magic to defeat the bandits, and then he passes away. Arthur, Merlin, Morgan, and Guinevere return to the kingdom, with Arthur indulging in his favorite pastime of hunting during the journey. Arthur takes pleasure in hunting a unicorn. During this moment, the ghost of an old man briefly appears to Merlin before vanishing. Upon their return to the palace, Arthur is content with his accomplishments. However, conditions in the entire kingdom worsen, with declining wheat production and water sources drying up until they turn to dust. Nobody knows why that's happening. Merlin tries to use his magic to transform the dust into water, but without success. He decides to go to the dragon, Kilgera, to consult it about the mysterious reason behind what's happening in the kingdom. He comes across Arthur, and as they talk, they see the same old man who appeared to Merlin in the forest. They run after him until they reach the place in which they saw him. There, the old man appears before them and introduces himself as Anhora, the keeper of the unicorns. Anhora tells them that Arthur is responsible for the curse, revealing it was unleashed when he killed the unicorn. And the only way to save the kingdom of Camelot is through Arthur. He should pass the tests that he will undergo. And if he cannot atone for what he did by killing the unicorn, then the curse will continue, people will die, and the kingdom will come to an end. While they are patrolling at night guarding the crops, suddenly they hear the sound of movement from inside. Arthur checks in to find a man stealing a sack of wheat. Upon learning that he was stealing for the sake of his hungry children, Arthur allows him to take what's enough for them. Luckily, on the following day, Guinevere discovers that the water has returned to the wells. Merlin says that the curse is being removed little by little, and that this is his first test. Arthur and Merlin go to the place where the unicorn has been hunted, and there they find Anhora. Arthur chases him. On their way back, Arthur encounters the man who had been stealing crops and realizes the man is a liar when he discovers a stash of stolen food in his possession. The man attempts to provoke Arthur by reminding him of his weakness. This incenses Arthur, and he engages in a physical confrontation with the man. As Arthur is about to strike the man with his sword, the man inexplicably evaporates into thin air. Anhora appears in his place and informs Arthur that he has failed the test. He shouldn't have allowed his pride to drive him to the point of wanting to kill someone. He should have simply ignored the man. Upon their return to the kingdom, the conditions have significantly deteriorated, with the crops rotting. In the forest, Merlin seeks the approval of Anhora to grant Arthur one final chance to pass the test. Anhora agrees but warns that the last test won't be easy. Arthur must navigate the labyrinth of Gidref. Prepared for his ultimate trial to save the kingdom of Camelot, Arthur is accompanied by Merlin into the labyrinth. However, Anhora separates them, explaining that it is Arthur's test to endure. At the end of the labyrinth, Arthur finds Merlin sitting at a table, with Anhora instructing them to choose between two glasses, one of which is poisonous. In a selfless act, Merlin combines the contents of both glasses into one, ready to drink. But Arthur seizes the glass and consumes its contents, subsequently falling unconscious on the ground. Anhora declares that Arthur has passed the test, lifting the curse from the kingdom. Upon their return to Camelot, the wells have filled with water, the crops have flourished, and prosperity is restored to the kingdom. Arthur decides to bury the unicorn in the forest, but he is taken aback when he discovers that the creature is miraculously alive. The unicorn appears to express gratitude to Arthur, recognizing his kind heart. Several days later, the blacksmith, Tom, who is Guinevere's father, is seen working with silver for a mysterious man. The man approaches and recites a magic spell over the silver, transforming it into pure gold. Arthur and his men burst in to apprehend the man, but he manages to escape, leaving Tom in his place. Something strange is happening in the kingdom, and Merlin senses it. The man is revealed to be Tauren, the leader of rebellious magicians and sorcerers who seek to isolate King Uther from Camelot. The king decides to execute Guinevere's father, Tom. Arthur and Morgan intervene to lessen his punishment, as it's evident that he had no involvement in Torrin's plan. However, the king insists on Tom's execution. On her side, Guinevere questions her father and confirms that he had no knowledge of Torrin's intentions. Tom simply wanted to carry out his work as a blacksmith and get paid for it. Morgan's discovery of the magical stone in the blacksmith's workshop, the same stone used to transfer silver into gold, leaves her intrigued by its radiant power. Meanwhile, Merlin senses the magic within the stone from a distance. In an attempt to help Tom's escape from execution, Morgan provides him with the cell key. However, the guards apprehend Tom as he tries to flee, and the king orders his tragic execution. Upon learning of the situation the following day, Morgan confronts King Uther and disputes his decision. As a punishment, the king imprisons her in a cell, aiming to teach her not to question his rulings and to emphasize his authority, as he believes that everything he does is for the good of the kingdom. In the library, Gaius delves into the Book of Legends to learn more about the stone's power. He discovers that it has the ability to transform objects from their original form. The stone possesses formidable power, which is why Merlin was able to sense it from a distance. Back in the blacksmith's workshop, Torrin threatens Guinevere, demanding that she retrieve the magic stone from the forest the following day, or else he will kill her. Arthur has released Morgan from the dungeon and orders her to respect her father's authority, because next time he will not be able to save her. Upon returning to her room, Morgan discovers Guinevere in a state of distress and fear. Learning about Guinevere's predicament, Morgan decides to take the magic stone to Torrin in the forest as demanded. Under the cover of night, she retrieves the stone, and Merlin senses the stone's magical power and decides to follow its trail. He tracks Morgan as she leaves the palace and ventures into the forest. There, she meets Torrin and hands over the stone. Torrin, however, initially suspects Morgan of being a spy for the king and contemplates killing her. When Morgan reveals the traces of handcuffs on her wrists and expresses her desire to see the king dead, Torrin believes her and decides to use her help in assassinating the king. Merlin, witnessing this shocking exchange, is taken aback. He decides to keep this information to himself and does not immediately share it with Gaius. Merlin, conflicted about the events unfolding, consults with Kilgera in his lair. The dragon advises him to do nothing and let the events play out because, with King Uther's death, he would be free to practice magic openly. Morgan, with a plan in motion, apologizes to King Uther for her actions and suggests they visit her father's grave as they were old friends. In the evening, she secretly meets with Torrin to discuss a plan to trap and kill the king. Merlin is aware of the plot against King Uther, but based on the dragon's counsel, chooses not to interfere. However, when he encounters Guinevere, he questions her about what she would do if the king killed her father. Guinevere expresses her belief that killing the king would accomplish nothing and would make her a murderer. This response prompts Merlin to change his course of action. Returning to his chambers, he retrieves the Book of Magic and Ulfric's wand. With the magic wand, he targets Torrin's men and kills them. Meanwhile, the king and Morgan visit her father's grave. Merlin, using the magic wand, attempts to kill Torrin. However, Torrin, sensing the magic, neutralizes the wand's power with the magic stone he possesses, causing Merlin to faint. At her father's grave, Morgan experiences a change of heart, overwhelmed by sorrow. She is especially moved by King Uther's expression of regret over Tom's execution. In a surprising turn of events, Morgan takes action and kills Torrin, saving King Uther. When Merlin regains consciousness and arrives at the scene, he finds that Morgan has taken matters into her own hands and resolved the situation. After a few days, Arthur and Merlin venture into the forest for a hunting trip, only to encounter a beast with the body of a lion and the head of a massive snake. Despite their bravery, they find themselves unable to defeat this magical creature. Upon returning to the palace, they describe the beast to Gaius, who identifies it as an extremely powerful magical entity. When Gaius informs King Uther of this discovery, the king dismisses it as just an ordinary monster and instructs Arthur to kill it with the assistance of a battalion of soldiers. Gaius, aware of King Uther's skepticism, confides in Merlin and emphasizes the need for thorough preparation to combat the magical creature. He recalls encountering this beast at the time of Igraine's death, signifying its formidable and dangerous nature. As they reach the monster's den, which is filled with human skeletons, the creature emerges from behind and attacks Arthur. Arthur attempts to defend himself with his sword, but the monster manages to bite him, causing him to lose consciousness and collapse. Merlin, in a desperate attempt to save Arthur, engages the monster and uses a combination of Arthur's sword and a magical spell to defeat the beast. However, he finds Arthur in critical condition. Merlin rushes Arthur to Gaius, who informs him that there is no known cure for Arthur's ailment. Undeterred, Merlin refuses to accept that and turns to the Book of Magic in search of any potential remedy. During this critical moment, King Uther arrives, determined to personally care for his son. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, Merlin seeks guidance from Kilcara, who informs him that there is a possible cure through ancient magic practiced by a small group living on the Blessed Island behind the White Mountain. Merlin sets out on a journey to find the witch Ninue, who possesses the knowledge of this ancient magic. In exchange for helping Arthur, Ninue demands a price. Merlin offers his life in exchange for Arthur's recovery. Ninue brings forth a magical cup. Miraculously, the rain falls and fills the cup. She entrusts Merlin with this magical water. Upon returning to the palace, Merlin presents the enchanted water to Gaius, who administers it to Arthur. Through this mystical remedy, Arthur gradually regains his health and consciousness. As Gaius inquires about who Merlin encountered on the island, he reveals that he made a deal with the witch Ninue, trading his life for Arthur's recovery. However, as night falls, a storm brews, and an elderly woman unexpectedly arrives at the palace. The following morning, Merlin is shocked to discover that the elderly woman is his own mother. Ninue, it appears, deceived him, taking his mother's life in place of his own. In his grief and anger, Merlin confronts Kilcara that he knew about the deal he made with Ninue. Kilcara replies that serving by Arthur's side is the only way to allow magic to return to the kingdom, and that Merlin will regain his magical abilities. A furious Merlin decides that he will not release the dragon from his lair. When Kilcara attempts to breathe fire on him, Merlin defends himself with a magical barrier before departing. Fueled by a desire for vengeance, Merlin sets his sights on Ninue. He believes that killing the witch will restore balance and allow him to save his mother. He embarks on his journey to confront Ninue on the island. Upon reaching the island, Merlin discovers that Gaius has arrived before him and is lying injured on the ground. Ninue confronts him, declaring that he will not surpass her in strength. She hurls a fireball at his chest, but Merlin rises with power and rage. He seizes control over thunder and lightning, directing a barrage of thunderbolts at Ninue, ending her life. Gaius regains consciousness, and Kilcara, aware of the dire consequences of Merlin's actions, roars in his lair, hinting at the profound impact of Merlin's choices. But what will happen to Merlin? That's what we will discover in the coming episodes.